But they were sort of like primarily like we need our own gold fields. But what emerged was fur. You know, fur was our thing. Fur was like the thing of value. So Astor became a fur trader, and you know helped launch these fur trapping expeditions. And then became involved in what we now call the mountain man area. Like when you hear the term mountain men, the mountain man era. So we, in my sort of other job outside of doing my History Channel show, like we do audio originals, and we did one on the deerskin trade called the Long Hunters. It was about Daniel Boone, 1770s in the deerskin trade. And right now we're coming out with one called MeatEater's American History, the Mountain Men, and it covers that like John Jacob Astor era of the beaver trade and what all those dudes. So when you hear about Jim Bridger, John Coulter, Jed Smith, what they were producing a material that would be used to make felt hats. Like that's what that was all about.
Wow. Rather
than you'd think when they would trap a beaver, so you know the
How
Revenant,
many fucking beavers were around back then?
A lot. You know, more. Even though we've recovered them really successfully, there were far more beavers back then than there are now. But
what's the estimated population of beavers back then before people invaded?
In the tens of millions.
Wow.
You know,
what are they now?
Oh, I don't know. No, I do know because I looked at it the other day, but I forgot what it is. They're very recovered across a big part of their range. But nowhere near what it was at the time. You know, the whole continent was shaped by beavers. Like they manipulate their landscape more than anything besides humans, right? But people had always whittled away at them, you know. Like earlier I mentioned Daniel Boone, like his primary job was a deerskin. He was in the deerskin trade and what they were using for back then. You know when you see really old pictures of like kings and shit and they got those kind of white pants on? Mm-hmm. It's probably a buckskin pant, right? So our whole term with like when we say a buck, something's worth a buck.
Right.
That's about the equivalent value of a deerskin.
Right.
So, you know, that's where that term came from. Those guys at the same time, they would hunt deer skins in the summer because they wanted them real thin. And then they would switch and they would hunt beaver pelts in the winter for wool felt. To create wool felt. But we kind of gradually extirpated, like wiped out beaver numbers. And then when you get to 1804 and the Lewis and Clark expedition, Lewis and Clark push into the interior, into the northern Rockies and around the headwaters of the Missouri. And when they come back to St. Louis, like one of the things they report on is like, holy shit, like we found the last great stronghold of the beaver is in the Rockies. And that's what pushed this whole mountain man era. So when you watch the Revenant, like Hugh Glass, you know, getting mauled by the grizzly, those guys were all like, their thing was they were beaver trappers. And earlier I mentioned the English up around Hudson Bay. So you're familiar with this thing called the Hudson Bay Company from history?
Yes.
It was like a fur trading enterprise. The Hudson Bay Company and the English always had this model of the fur trade where they would build posts and then incentivize Indians to hunt fur or trap fur. They didn't trap, like the English weren't themselves trappers. The English were traders, and they would incentivize tribes to go trap and bring them the furs. In the Rockies, that didn't work. They couldn't get these nomadic equestrian bison hunters with the program. They thought it was, you know, by and large, the sentiment was it's beneath us. We're not going to give up our whole life way. Everything we need comes from the buffalo. We live in big family groups. We follow the herds. Like I'm not going to go trap beaver for you. It's of no interest to me. So then they're like, well, shit, how are we going to get the beaver? And so they start hiring dudes. They start hiring orphans and people that were under indentured servitude and ran away, whatever. They hired these big groups of Americans out of the colonies, the former colonies, because at the time of the United States. They hire these guys and say, you're going to go out and live for years at a time in the Rockies and trap beaver, and here's where to meet us on such and such date every year.